find that really, really fascinating. And I suppose what fascinates me is it showed. I think if you're a political artist, the problem is that people will try and belittle what you do. They will, and they'll do it by wheeling out really well-worn arguments. And one of the arguments that's always brought out is preaching to the converted or preaching to the choir, as the Americans will put it. The idea is, well, you're not changing anything because all you do is reconfirming somebody's beliefs that they had anyway. Well, I think that in itself is a simplistic argument, because let's say you're a comedian on the left in America in the early 1970s, and you go out there and tell jokes against the Vietnam War, and everybody in that audience is like young people, progressives or what have you, and they laugh and they go out feeling stronger and bolstered in their beliefs against the Vietnam War. Surely that's a legitimate effect. But I mean, the other point about it is, how can you measure any effect of what you've done? And it's almost impossible. You can't go to an audience and say, well, did I change your mind? Because even if they told you, you don't know how accurate what they say is. But one way you could at least know that people think what you're doing is effective is if they try and stop you and they're your enemy, right? So when Berlusconi, not exactly a stand-up comedian, but kind of like a stand-up comedian, when he tried to stop Dario Fo doing his touring show about Berlusconi, you could be pretty sure Berlusconi thought that it was actually undermining him, right? When people tried to stop Lenny Bruce saying what he was saying, you can be pretty sure that they thought it was having an effect. When the Nazis, it's not to do with professional comedy, but in Czechoslovakia, in pre-war Czechoslovakia, there was a great piece of writing by a sociologist, Czech sociologist, who got out about the use of humour, anti-Nazi humour. And he said that, any time a humorous graffito went up on the wall, the Nazis would just instantly get it down. Now, to me, and also if you were caught telling those jokes, you'd be arrested straight away. Now, to me, what that implies is they thought that the jokes did matter, that they did have an effect, and clearly the Czech people did as well, because apparently they used to write them down, put them in a bottle and bury the bottle in their garden, knowing that if it was found, they'd be arrested. But the symbolic power of that is amazing, because it's like, your country's occupied, but every time you see an archer, you think, yeah, but I've got a brilliant joke about you buried in my garden. Do you see what I mean? It's very subversive. Mm. And so I think those kind of profit figures, I think it is important. As well, it's worth bearing in mind that political oratory and stand-up comedy have a lot in common. Even the staging of them is similar. It's an audience facing a stage, microphone normally, and there are kind of structures that exist in stand-up that are very similar to structures that exist in oratory. So, for example, there's a thing in stand-up called the rule of three, and it's you group things into a pattern of three, and it gets more of a response from the audience. The standard form is a joke where you set something up, the second point in the list reinforces that idea, and the third thing undermines it and surprises the audience, and that's the form of the joke. But sometimes it's just that you have three jokes and you put them together and you put the strongest one third, and it gets a bigger reaction than it would have got as an isolated joke. Now, in oratory, there's a thing like that where you use a three-part list and it cues the audience to applaud. And you can trace this back to kind of, ancient Rome with Veni Vidi Vici. But I mean, the example I often give to students is education, education, education. That's a list of one turned into a three, right? And it's not education, 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 education. It's not education, education. It has to be three, So, the political speech is supposed to inspire and challenge. And it's very similar in form to the stand-up act. There's something as well about direct address to an audience. In Nazi Germany, they banned cabaret, which was a form which included elements which were similar to modern stand-up, particularly the conferencier, who would compare the show and make satirical comments and address the audience directly and all this. And the Nazis, before they banned cabaret completely, tried to make it Nazi-friendly, and one of the things they did was ban direct address. They banned the conferencier. I think it's a very powerful form. I think it creates a bond of intimacy between performer and audience, which is very powerful.